Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1118 just came out, and this was a controversial chapter, mainly because a lot of people have very mixed feelings about the fact that Bonnie can turn into Nika, basically copying Luffy's ability, which we all felt was something that was unique to him. I mean, we basically spent 1,000 chapters finding out that Nika is this legendary figure, this legendary being that really only Joy Boy can transform into, and that is why when Luffy awakened as Nika, that was the return of Joy Boy, what Tanisha was waiting on. That's why the Giants see Luffy as Nika and revere him as basically the coming of the Sun God and everything like that. There is a lot of significance to being able to turn into Nika. So, for a lot of people, the fact that Bonnie can turn into Nika, they don't like that because, one, it's cutting into what makes Luffy so special. Two, a lot of people don't like it for the general reason that, hey, this makes Bonnie too powerful because not only can she turn into Nika, it seems like she can just turn into any sort of future, right? So if anything, Nika, which in itself is this form with the unlimited power of imagination, that seems to just be one slice of what Bonnie can do, which is other stuff besides Nika, so even more unlimited power of imagination, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I think we all might be getting ahead of ourselves here. First of all, we still don't know exactly how Bonnie's powers work. We'll probably get a better depiction of how exactly she stacks up to Luffy's abilities next chapter. Second, I personally think, and this might be my own little headcanon, but it's my interpretation of what Saturn told us, I personally think that as Bonnie gets older, and her future sort of becomes more decided, then the different options of what she can turn into become more limited. So I personally think that her fruit's really interesting because, yeah, she's really powerful as a child, but it's possible that this fruit really is only this powerful when you are a child and your future is just open to a wider variety of possibilities. So it's stuff that we kind of need to wait to find out more about. Also, for me, I'm not too thrown by any of this because this is stuff that I've been talking about for some time now. 6 months ago, I dropped a video talking about how Bonnie seems like she's being written to be a successor to Luffy in some sense. Most likely she's going to join the crew, and it seems like she's written in terms of personality, mannerisms, drives, desires to be very similar to a young Luffy, and on top of that, the ability that she had that was being showcased even 6 months ago was the ability to transform into anything she could kind of dream of or imagine, very similar to Luffy, and she even was using a Nika-ish future all the way back then, even in the Kuma flashback. So I already thought that Oda's writing Bonnie in this direction. It just made sense, and then this chapter, everybody was very shocked to see that, oh my god, Bonnie turned into Nika just like Luffy, and Luffy's kind of guiding her to go along in his footsteps and kind of act like him, and I'm just like, yeah, this has been a thing. Like, Oda's kind of been shaping her in that direction. When I dropped that video, people did push back on that a lot. They're like, what are you talking about? Why would Bonnie be any sort of apprentice to Luffy, etc.? I'm like, this isn't that crazy of a prediction. This is just how Oda's writing the character. This isn't like something totally out of the blue. But whatever, I'm happy to see that we did get that side-by-side of Luffy and Bonnie as Nika. I do understand why a lot of people dislike it. I think a lot of people are trying to circle around the reasons of why they don't like it, and I think they're not able to actually articulate it particularly well because there is a certain storytelling principle at play here as to why a lot of people may not like it that they just don't know how to express, and that's why next Tuesday's video is going to go in depth on this very topic because there is more to it than just like, oh, well, we already knew her fruit could do this, therefore it doesn't matter, versus the flip side of like, well, only Luffy should be able to turn into Nika. There's more complexity to this discussion because, again, it just goes to a certain storytelling principle that I think would be very, very interesting to explain and see how people view Bonnie's new abilities and her new role in the story after that. And before we get any further, I want to congratulate Linskoff, JWP, and Sal for their correct predictions for the previous chapter, chapter 1117. Every break week, I will be doing a stream where we can see which viewers can correctly predict the events of the next chapter, so tune in next break week. Now that stuff aside, I will say one thing is that while we see Mars and everything floating around, and it seems like Luffy and Bonnie are maybe going to get a shot at fighting Mars, I would love to see Bonnie versus Saturn, because I feel like that's where the real beef should be at. So Bonnie versus Saturn would be extremely cathartic to see. We already got to see Kuma punch Saturn. I feel like it'd be really nice to see Bonnie get 1 and 2. Now, the Bonnie stuff aside, there was other stuff that happened this chapter, even if Bonnie discourse is kind of dominating different platforms right now. So, First of all, I really low-key liked the Iron Giant falling. I thought the Iron Giant falling, then his final words of him being able to realize that he was in the presence of Nika, I really like that, because initially at the start of the chapter, I was like, shoot, this Iron Giant might just sink and die without ever having gotten to sense Joy Boy again, even though he thought that he sensed him, and for some reason that felt very tragic, even though we barely know anything about this Iron Giant, but I'm kind of just imagining now the Iron Giant as one of Joy Boy's crewmates, and I'm like, shoot, imagine if that's, I don't know, Usopp sinking into the ocean thinking that he sensed Luffy again, and then at the end of the chapter he's able to realize, Luffy, you were here. I like that. I feel like when we finally get, this is one of those things where I feel like when we finally get the Void Sentry flashback and really come to understand who the Iron Giant was, what the connection to Joy Boy was, this moment is going to hit much, much harder, just in retrospect, understanding what happened here. So, I don't know, I felt something reading this chapter, reading the Iron Giant's words, just because you kind of know Oda as a writer, what he's going to do down the line is going to make me feel really, really sad when I go back and read what's happening to the Iron Giant here. So I like that, surprisingly. What I was disappointed by is, in retrospect, realizing that, Vegapunk's speech is just over, and seeing the reactions to Vegapunk's speech was very frustrating, because I realized that the most important thing that I believe that Vegapunk was set to do with this speech, that he didn't really quite pull the trigger on, was exposing that the world government is really bad. That's a huge, huge, huge deal. Right? That's what the whole final war for the world should be predicated on, that the world understands that the world government is bad. It was just frustrating to hear, even now, different people saying that, oh, it must be the Straw Hats that killed Vegapunk. It's the Straw Hats that killed Vegapunk and everything. And it's just like, why? Like, Vegapunk already suspected that it would be the world government who comes and kills him, right? Vegapunk, he's telling the world about these ancient weapons that exist. He's telling the world about this war that took place 800 years ago between the world government and Joy Boy and such. He's not going out of his way to really paint the picture that, hey, who has the ancient weapons today is probably the world government, right? Again, Vegapunk himself doesn't know for sure, as my stream viewers kindly pointed out to me. Vegapunk doesn't know that for a fact, but we do know that Vegapunk has been working actively to fight against the world government in secret. He had that conversation with Dragon that they share the same goal. He could have said something, anything. He could have done some revelations like, this is the chance. You have the entire world by the ear in the moment. Tell them the truth about the world government. The fact that we're ending this window of opportunity where Vegapunk got to tell his truth to the entire world, and the onlookers, the people that are hearing, are still coming away with it with basically like, the world government certainly wouldn't kill Vegapunk, it must be the Straw Hat Pirates. To me, that is just beyond frustrating, because it's just like, this was the time. How is it that you got to spill everything you wanted to spill to all the people of the world, and they're still coming away with it with no idea the type of regime that they're under, who are the actual bad guys, who even was most likely to have killed Vegapunk? None of that came out. So the fact that he got this information out, but all it's really going to do is sort of stir up a panic and not really cause a change from what we can tell. In fact, the narrative still seems to have held fast and tight in the broader minds of the people of the world. That is just beyond difficult for me, especially considering just the Gorosei. They were fighting so hard to hide all this information. They got off lucky. Most people in the world are not going to really stop trusting the world government over this, it seems. Maybe they start questioning where the ancient weapons are, what's going on, why have the water levels been rising and everything like that, who fired the ancient weapons. Maybe they start questioning, but if you're the Gorosei, if you're Imu, you're like wiping your forehead with a sigh of relief, like, okay, at least he didn't out us. So yeah, while a lot of people were upset with the Bonnie situation this chapter, I had my own stuff to be upset about, which is basically, it's gonna be a minute. It's gonna be a little bit longer before we get some sort of dissent among the Marines, before we get some sort of huge falling out where everybody's like, you know what, the world government is evil, we need to rise up against them, and just the truth spilling out and the true spark for the conflict taking place. We've just got a bit more time. This Vegapunk speech, it really was a lore drop that just convenient. It was a good lore drop for us, the viewers, and gives us a lot more understanding of the stakes and the direction of the final conflict and what we're going to be fighting over and what the threat is, which seems to be the rising water levels that will happen as Uranus is fired over and over again. That's great. In the broader spectrum of the world, I was hoping that this would be more of a catalyst for change, whereas now it seems more so like it's going to be a catalyst for unrest and uncertainty, but not necessarily hard change and hard, nations taking up arms and rebelling and the Marines being thrown into a frenzy and maybe a Kainu taking action. It seems like that stuff, while still certain to happen down the line in the story as the Celestial Dragon's evils get more and more exposed and their use of Uranus becomes more frequent, for now, that period of the story is something that we're still going to have to wait on. So I'm a little bit disappointed by that, but it is what it is. And then the last piece of good news that we have is that there's no break next week, so it seems like Oda is back to his 3 weeks in a row schedule, followed by a break, followed by 3 weeks in a row. So I'm really happy about that. Again, I'm going to maintain that I believe that the reason that we were getting those infrequent chapters earlier is just because, look, I've read, if you read Vegapunk's speech from start to finish, which some people have posted the full text of the speech from start to finish in various places, if you read the whole thing from start to finish, it is essentially Oda scripting out one long monologue where he has to be very, very precise with the exact information that he's sharing with the reader, which he's sharing with the world, because the fallout of it needs to be very, very, very well planned and thought out, and Oda was having to pan across the world to all these different characters from all different times and periods of the story in all different locations, and kind of make sure that he gets the right reaction and really showcases how the world is shifting, but not shifting too much. It's a very precise segment of the story to write, plus with the active action going on at the same time with the Straw Hats and the Gorosei and all of that. It's a very difficult section of the story to write. I imagine he just needed to take more breaks because he did not want to this section of the story up. At least maybe I'm being optimistic. Hopefully it's not for health purposes, but I do believe it's just because it's a difficult section of the story to write, so it's better to take it slow and get it right than just write at the usual pace and then realize that Oda let slip a bit too much in Vegapunk's speech, or not enough, or he didn't get some proper word out, or he forgot to show some character's reaction or something like that. That's my belief. And lastly, we have an interesting point about the potential limits of Bonnie's abilities from the Voice of the People, my top tier of patrons. So Sunnyclip says, most of Bonnie's future transformations have been cosmetic or additive, strength buffs. But I wonder what the extent of her functionality copying Nika could be. Either she can actually mimic his reality warping or his stretching and giant size. Both are really good options, but the first would be crazy. Yeah, so this is a huge part of why I think maybe we shouldn't jump too much to conclusions regarding Bonnie's abilities, because it's not like she hasn't done anything like show me a Whitebeard future and then she starts doing Guru Guru no Mi quakes or anything like that, right? And in theory, if that's part of her Fruit's abilities to show any sort of future, then that would be up her alley. I mean, Bonnie was there watching Marine Ford. I'm sure she could have picked up a thing or two in terms of abilities that characters have used. So far, she's used very basic abilities, just making herself bigger, more buff. Really, she's just done, as you said, physical buffs, right? Like making herself giant-sized or like a Gear 3rd type fist. But what we'll really get to see next chapter is if this Gear 5th Nika transformation that she's doing, if it's just to look like Luffy, and maybe she'll be able to copy his stretchiness and his rubber powers and stuff like that and make her fists gigantic and everything like that, or is she actually going to be able to use Luffy's abilities, like warping reality, turning things into rubber, making things cartoonish? Because that would be insane, and Bonnie has seen her fair share of other superpowered beings, right? So if she can copy Luffy and turn into Nika, who knows what else she could do? Again, like admirals are not out of the question. Why can't she turn into a light man like Kizaru? I don't know. We're gonna find out the limits of her abilities next week, so I'm really excited for next chapter. And with that, that's all for this video, and I will talk to you all next week.